Can you beat John Arknights Seaborn with only base IDs? Yes, but the visual presentation before you does imply the possibility of achieving a satisfactory result, but the definition you may designate to the term satisfactory might vary as the duration of the engagement will reach beyond the usual length one might expect were they to command a more superior element. I expect that you might have your reservations regarding its length, and I urge you to compose yourself, even if it's just for the duration of this audio-visual presentation. If it brings you solace, do note that the possibility of a more expedient conclusion is possible. What is showcased before you was the result of a few lapses of judgment. As I am assumedly human, operational missteps were conducted and should be noted for correction for the possibility of another, more efficient attempt. Oh, I forgot to clash. My participation of this event has revealed some harrowing truths. Opportunity will not equally present itself to all who seek it. The seemingly random nature in which you collect these limited abilities does not have reliability in mind. As such, there may be players who do not have access to the composition most fit to progress through this point. What I can guarantee, however, are that all players have access to the base units and the methods in which to upgrade them to their fullest potential. However, considering the degree of which the limited time E.G.O is available for this event, I saw it fit to include it into the trial. That being said, the completion of this challenge has me pleased to reveal that there was only one E.G.O that I believed was essential for survival, and will therefore have it in my supporting lineup in case you, Doctor, Executive Manager, would like to navigate this tide. Out of the allotted selection, the most prominent skill is as follows. Command Meltdown, CMD, for the medical applications in order to allow our operators, Sinners, to remain in the field for as long as possible. The defensive capabilities it provides to Operator Faust will also be of use in order for her to appropriately defend herself. Tidal Elegy, TE, to deal a crushing blow against our prey, and Snag Harpoon, SH, to chart our own path to victory. Operator Ishmael is well versed in fighting terrors of the sea, given her resonance to the waves and hunting beneath its abyss. As such, it should be an obvious conclusion for tacticians such as yourself to utilize your expertise. With Faust and Ishmael's combination of Sin Generation, it should be possible to use both their E.G.Os in intermittent moments. It is to be noted that E.G.O, Snag Harpoon, only needs to be activated once to gain the benefit of its passive, with the main combat focus being on her Tidal Elegy for the devastating damage she leaves in her wake. Be careful, Doctor, as the Knight's defenses have been augmented by the Seaborn to a shivering degree. Should any operator strike them for any reason, the operator will incur a drastic drop in bodily temperature. Should the thermal interruption compound up to the third magnitude, it will result in a catastrophic deceleration of the intermolecular forces within their immediate vicinity, effectively freezing them. Also note that despite the seemingly declining mental faculties being displayed by our opponent, their will remains steadfast. Any successful defense they perform will result in an increase to their focus. However, the inverse remains to be true. If you are unsure of your operator's Sinner's ability to grasp victory in any engagement, try to consider a full implementation of defensive maneuvers to be a viable strategy. I must stress that the appropriate rotation and relief for the operators experiencing thermal interruptions are paramount to victory, as your unit is already experiencing a handicap in their inability to access your ID cards. Combat effectiveness through precise commands must remain in its peak at all times. One misstep or a frozen sinner could be catastrophic to the unit as a whole. The similarities in the first and second phase of the engagement can be noted. Certain properties in its attacks are enhanced, but still have its glaring weaknesses. I must admit that the emphasis on defensive maneuvers had come as an amusing novelty. I'm sure the small changes in penalizing constant offense has left some of the enjoyers of win rating in a disgruntled state. To keep brevity in mind, here is a guide on how to most effectively determine appropriate engagement strategies. Block or evade the Tide Piercer, while clashing and winning against the Tidebreaker. This is true in both phases, even as Tide Piercer becomes unbreakable in the second phase, but does not have the caveat of being unable to stagger and dealing 80% less damage upon losing the clash. The irony that the event that premieres one of these E.G.Os also has an encounter that displays its flaws is not lost upon me. In the second phase, the Last Knight gets an attack that targets all sinners currently in the field, and also bears the benefit of having unbreakable coins. Granted, one can try to dodge with Faust, but the attack will reach up to 16 attack power even upon losing a clash. Either this hitting Faust or the weaker but still unbreakable 2-coin attack dealing 1 to 3 damage will still be enough to qualify on Faust as damage enough to warrant using one of the 2 heals for herself, despite the fact that her allies are in a worse physical state. Once the pattern and mechanics of combat is discerned, the ease of this engagement becomes exponentially more bearable. However, it is to be noted that due to the provided unit's lack of offensive capabilities, the duration is anything but. Considering the degree in which the limited time E.G.O attacks are utilized, proper coordination with the appropriate sinners for the supplication of the appropriate resources is highly recommended. Being a single enemy encounter, the passive of Tidal Elegy grants a free +1 clash power and an increase of 11.5% damage. Additionally, the utilization of her Snag Harpoon increases the clash power by a further 2 with its E.G.O passive, Compulsion. Do note that this scenario only applies to clashes that are labeled as at least favorable to Ishmael. This effectively made Ishmael the premier hunter of this Abyssal Knight, as her Tidal Elegy can easily deal damage upwards of at least 100. Upon the conclusion of this challenge, it is to be noted that the possibility of completion does exist even while using base units and failing to apply the Knight's Corpus debuff. The only stipulation is that either 1 or 2 of the limited time E.G.O is utilized. If unavailable, then Fluid Sac would likely be another viable candidate for Faust. The overall fight is interesting and not as daunting as one might assume. While initially the Knight has a staggeringly high amount of defense, the overall HP is quite low, emphasized even more on the second phase where, should events fall in your favor, it loses a great deal of its defenses. The freeze mechanic is interesting as winning clashes can still be viewed as detrimental. Oh wait, we can lose clashes on purpose. And he wins it! But oh my god, man, but whenever I want him to win a fucking clash, he doesn't. That is epic. Actual defensive maneuvers will be essential in this encounter. Merely win raiding through will be inefficient. Furthermore, the subtle differences between Tide Piercer and Tide Breaker is a great way to give players a hint on how they should defend. As in winning against clashes with Mina Stack of Cold, players should look to block against Tide Piercer as its damage will be in full no matter the circumstance, and clash against Tidebreaker, as upon losing the clash, Tidebreaker loses 80% of its damage. Coming from a player of Arknights who did survive that version of its fight, I'd say it's an accurate representation of its abilities, down to the name and the references it gives. If you have any suggestions as to increase the efficiency of this challenge, please leave them in the comments below. I appreciate your time and attention for the duration of this presentation, and please remember to properly hydrate yourselves with appropriate beverages.
파도는 반드시 밀려올 테니.
Mission accomplished.
솔직히 이번엔 좀 잘한 것 같네요. 그렇죠?